So just in the last couple of years, the gaming industry has changed in a big way, primarily driven from top-line companies doing a lot of merger and acquisition style activity, and it seems like almost every other day you come across an article that states that a new company is heavily investing in a different brand, or they're entirely aiming to acquire them. And in today's video, I want to discuss the latest article that came across my news feed that has my eyes on this situation, and discuss how, if at all, it affects Nintendo in 2022 and beyond. What's up, nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are talking about the gaming industry as a whole and the current landscape we find ourselves in 2022 and looking towards the future, because over the last couple of years there has been a lot of interesting moving pieces around mergers and acquisitions or heavy investments from larger companies into other brands, and I want to break down and discuss how this affects Nintendo, if at all, into the far distant future. As one thing that got me thinking about this is the following article over on VGC, where we can see that Tencent is acquiring a stake in Ubisoft's family holding. Partnership also allows the Chinese company to double its stake in the Assassin's Creed publisher. And essentially, the long and short of this is that Tencent is investing $297 million and actually acquiring 49.9 economic stake with 5% voting rights, which essentially is going to make them a more powerful player in terms of potentially decisions that Ubisoft has whenever it comes to publishing new games. Now, they are specifically quoted here saying, separately, Ubisoft has authorized Tencent to raise its direct stake in the Assassin's Creed publisher from 4.5 to 9.99 of the capital or voting rights, a stake it won't be able to further increase for a period of 8 years. Ubisoft said the partnership with Tencent covers the development of mobile titles from several of Ubisoft's major franchises and the launch of several Ubisoft PC titles in China, which you do have to keep in mind with a company like Tencent. They are heavily invested into mobile, but they're heavily invested into a lot of things at this point in time. And the article continues that even in April, we saw takeover rumors potentially with Ubisoft and its parent company shopping around for other companies to come in and take it over. And that's where you have to kind of zoom out and look at the broader list of these acquisitions that we have seen recently. And you may notice that now this is basically acquisitions with the deal value of at least $1 billion. So it's only counting the big players here. And obviously we have right at the top of the list Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, which we will deep dive into briefly. But you do have to look at kind of the progression of how things go here, because you have notable mergers like Bandai Namco happening back in 2005. Then you go all the way to 2014, since we get another $1 billion plus valuation, and it's Facebook acquiring Oculus. Then you have things like Activision Blizzard and King back in 2015, notable at $5.9 billion. Tencent acquiring Supercell at $8.6 million in 2016. Then I want to point out the fact that that is only a few of the bottom line acquisitions, and we quickly accelerate to mega deals going through in 2020 and 2021 and now into 2022, taking the cake essentially, with the largest proposed ever acquisition being Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. And while Sony is definitely trying to do what they can to potentially block that deal or at least get it investigated further, it definitely sounds like Microsoft's going to have some additional hoops to jump through, such as things like Phil Spencer actually taking the time to handwrite a letter and sign it stating that they will continue to keep Call of Duty on the platform years after the deal expires, which is definitely Sony's biggest concern right now when mainline franchises and that have a household name like Call of Duty and a mainstream draw, that yes, they don't want to lose that as an exclusive to Microsoft. And that's where you kind of have to take a look at this list and see what kind of companies we're talking about here, like Electronic Arts acquiring Codemasters for $1.2 billion back in 2020. Then you have Tencent acquiring Leo, I don't know exactly how to say that, $1.5 billion, but Tencent's on this list a lot, and I would pay attention to that. Zynga acquiring Peak at $1.8 billion, Microsoft acquiring ZeniMax Media, otherwise known as Bethesda, because that is their parent company, and that was at $8.1 billion, which was definitely a notable acquisition and has helped fuel Game Pass, with Microsoft's ultimate vision being subscribe to our service to play our games and don't worry about paying these individual $60 or $70 prices for new releases. They just want you to be a paid subscriber, similar to how they do with their software as a service side of their business like they focus on with the Office side of things. So you have them taking a different approach to the future of gaming. Tencent again on the list, acquiring Sumo Group at $1.27 billion. Then you also have Embracer Group, which is definitely one that as of recently has been on everybody's radar because they're acquiring companies left and right. But the one on this current Wikipedia page was Gearbox Software for $1.3 billion. EA doing multiple companies in 2021, one at 1.4 and one at 2.4 billion. ByteDance acquiring Moonton at $4 billion. Sony Interactive Entertainment making the list with Bungie, which is kind of hilarious, the fact that they actually acquired one of Microsoft's original studios, and then Microsoft is trying to acquire the studio that essentially made Crash Bandicoot back in the day, and Bungie making the original Halo games. So you essentially have Sony and Microsoft trading off their Gen 1 console mascot creators, and then you have Take-Two Interactive acquiring Zynga at the time, the biggest gaming deal ever in history, $12.7 billion, and that sounded like a ton. Now, of course, Microsoft targeting Activision Blizzard at $68.7 billion. Easily the biggest deal in gaming ever, and really up there with very few mergers that ever hit that kind of dollar point. And whether or not this one closes will be interesting to watch. I definitely think Microsoft's going to do what they need to do to close the deal and actually get it done, but there are numerous groups now looking at this thing with a closer eye. With this kind of dollars being thrown around, you have to make sure that it is not anti-consumer and would not be a bad move for the gaming space. And I think Microsoft, while they may go exclusive with Call of Duty in the far future and things like that, I think their goal for the time being is to get Game Pass on as many devices as possible. And I think they're seeing a future where a lot of people are playing on tablets and mobile devices and not necessarily always on that Xbox console. And they will probably put a hefty push for xCloud and Game Pass together and play wherever you are, whenever you want. And I definitely see that appeal. Now, I want to spin the conversation at this point and talk about how Nintendo fits into this landscape, because they are in a unique position with the current generation that we are looking at in the Nintendo Switch era of gaming. And I may have been nervous about all of these mergers and acquisitions and Nintendo not getting a ton of third-party support. Granted, with the Switch, they've definitely found their niche with all of the indie titles being added into the eShop, and really almost like a Steam level of support when it comes to great games from independent developers. You also have big third-party titles that sometimes never make it over to Nintendo's console. And the unique thing about Nintendo is that while you could argue that they should be going out there and acquiring some of these companies before the mega names take all of them up and Nintendo can't directly work with them anymore, the thing about Nintendo is that you are always going to buy a Nintendo console for their first party IP that will exist essentially nowhere else in that form. Nintendo knows what they have with franchises like Mario. It is a household name. They are working on a mainline cinematic movie that will be out in 2023. We know things like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and its sales performance hitting 46 plus million, 48, whatever it was at last time. It's approaching 50 million in total unit sales on the Nintendo Switch, and you have to keep in mind that is just a Wii U port of Mario Kart 8, which sold on that system as well, granted to a much smaller user base. And you have that alongside games like Animal Crossing New Horizons coming in at 39.38 million units, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate 28 million, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 27 million, and then of course their deal with the Pokemon Company exclusively releasing those Pokemon games on Nintendo platforms. Over 24 million copies of Sword and Shield sold. You don't see these kind of numbers when it comes to third-party games on the competitors' end. So yes, while the gaming industry is continuing to consolidate, and it will be very interesting to see where we're at 10 years from now, whether or not major names like Google and Amazon and Apple ever dive deeper into this console competition space that goes on right now. Nintendo is uniquely positioned that really they can do the same thing for the foreseeable future until maybe a game industry shift breakup happens, where something, you know, revolutionary new technology comes out, where maybe Nintendo has to get on board and do some merger acquisition activity themselves and broaden their horizons when it comes to the companies that they have under their umbrella. But for the foreseeable future, with the kind of IP that they own directly that they can choose to only release on Nintendo branded hardware, they can essentially do a Nintendo Switch 2, which is what I'm hoping they do. And the next generation, when it does start, whether or not it's the Pro model mid-gen refresh and we're with the Switch family of systems for a while, or if it's a clean hard break in a year or two and we're starting from the ground up on a new console, I do think that Nintendo has a winning formula for the foreseeable future, and they really can just stay the course and continue to produce these top line, top quality AAA titles, and they will still be extremely competitive. And essentially they're competing outside of the mainline market, with Sony and Microsoft kind of taking aim directly at each other, trying to be the household console manufacturer. I think Nintendo is that additional console that most people may say, I have a Series X and a Nintendo Switch, or I have a PS5 or a PS4 and a Nintendo Switch. And basically Nintendo has found a really specific market that they can target due to their longevity in this space, with putting out games since the NES, like the original Super Mario Bros. And the original Legend of Zelda. And we now have a household of gamers that the parents of kids today recognize those franchises from back in the day. And Nintendo has figured out and struck gold with a hybrid formula, which means, yes, you can take your gaming on the go without having to require things like cloud streaming and the stuff that really is not fleshed out enough in most parts of the world, especially here in the US right now. It is just a subpar experience to stream games rather than play them natively. So my personal opinion on all the merger and acquisition talk is that Nintendo is good for now, and we will have to wait and see if they need to make any additional changes down the line. And I am hopeful for whatever the future holds for Nintendo. It's just more of the same, but more powerful in that portable hybrid console environment that we find ourselves in today. But I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, all your personal thoughts and feelings around where we're at with the gaming industry as a whole, all these acquisitions, merger talk, new investments from mega companies. Do you think it shifts the landscape for major companies like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo? Do you think Nintendo can continue to do the same thing with the Switch and be profitable and sell hundreds of millions of units all along the way like we were seeing them do in the Switch era? Or do you think that maybe one day Nintendo will find themselves in a position where they do have to make a radical change and try to go after more mainline companies and maybe acquire them and bring them into their umbrella of corporations that they own in order to stay competitive? So regardless of all your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, where we boot up the fan-made Unreal Engine project of Zelda Ocarina of Time, the current remake that we have today in 2022. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.